King Solomon, known as the wisest man who ever lived, blessed by God with unmatched wisdom, staggering wealth, and immense power. But what really happened to this great king? How did a man so favored by God end his life in despair, regret, and spiritual ruin? Join us as we uncover the untold story of Solomon's last day, a day filled with reflections on his glory, his downfalls, and the tragic consequences of turning away from God. Discover how a king who had it all ended up saying, "Everything is meaningless," and what his story means for us today. Stay with us until the end to witness the powerful lessons from Solomon's life that can still change ours. What can we learn from his mistakes? How can we avoid the traps that led him astray? This story is not just about a king. It's about every one of us who has ever struggled with pride, temptation, and the pull of worldly desires. If you find this story inspiring and eye-opening, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring more powerful biblical stories and life-changing lessons straight to you. We also encourage you to share your thoughts. What stood out to you most about Solomon's journey? Leave a comment below. We love hearing from our community. And don't forget to share this video with your friends and family, because these timeless lessons are meant to be shared. So, let's dive into the final chapter of King Solomon's life and discover the ultimate truth behind his rise, his fall, and the heartbreaking end of the wisest king of Israel. Don't miss this powerful story that could change the way you view your own life. Let's get started. King Solomon began his reign with incredible promise. He was the son of David and Bathsheba, chosen by God to ascend the throne of Israel after David's reign. From the very beginning, Solomon's journey was marked by divine favor and guidance. In 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 5, we read that the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream at Gibeon, saying, "Ask for whatever you want me to give you." In response, Solomon made a request that would define his legacy. He didn't ask for wealth, long life, or the death of his enemies. Instead, in 1 Kings chapter 3 verse 9, Solomon humbly asked, "Give your servant an understanding heart to judge your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this great people of yours?" God was greatly pleased with Solomon's request. In 1 Kings chapter 3 verses 10 to 14, God not only granted Solomon unparalleled wisdom, but also promised him riches, honor, and a long life, on the condition that Solomon would remain faithful to God's commands. Solomon's wisdom was immediately put to the test when two women came before him, both claiming to be the mother of the same child. This event, recorded in 1 Kings chapter 3 verses 16 to 28, showcases Solomon's God-given discernment. He suggested dividing the living child in two, knowing the true mother would rather give up her claim than see her son killed. The people of Israel marveled at his wisdom, realizing that God's wisdom was truly with their king. From that moment, Solomon's fame spread far and wide. In 1 Kings chapter 4 verses 29 to 30, it is written, "God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt." He authored 3,000 proverbs and over 1,000 songs. 1 Kings chapter 4 verse 32, covering themes of life, nature, leadership, and faith. Solomon's wisdom attracted the attention of the Queen of Sheba, a powerful monarch who traveled a great distance to test his wisdom with hard questions. In 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 6 to 7, she declared, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth, you have far exceeded the report I heard." This encounter highlighted how God's blessing on Solomon was not only personal, but a testament to God's favor upon Israel. But Solomon's most significant achievement was the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, a task that his father David had longed to fulfill. Solomon's temple, described in 1 Kings chapter 6, was an architectural marvel of its time, built with the finest materials, cedar from Lebanon, gold, silver, and bronze. It took 7 years to complete, and stood as the spiritual center of Israel, a place where God's presence dwelled among his people. 1 Kings chapter 8 verses 10 to 11. When the temple was completed, Solomon led the nation in a powerful prayer of dedication. In 1 Kings chapter 8 verses 22 to 53, he prayed, acknowledging God's greatness and asking him to hear the prayers of his people. Solomon's heartfelt prayer is summarized in 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 23. Lord, the God of Israel, there is no God like you in heaven above or on earth below. You who keep your covenant of love with your servants, who continue wholeheartedly in your way. Under Solomon's rule, Israel reached unprecedented heights of wealth, power, and influence. Solomon's kingdom was a beacon of prosperity, attracting traders, scholars, and rulers from all corners of the ancient world. As recorded in 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 23 to 24, King Solomon was greater in riches and wisdom than all the other kings of the earth. The whole world sought audience with Solomon to hear the wisdom God had put in his heart. Solomon's wealth was beyond measure. He controlled trade routes that connected Egypt to Mesopotamia, bringing in gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks from distant lands. 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 22. His fleet of ships returned every 3 years laden with treasures, demonstrating his far-reaching influence. In 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 14, we learn that Solomon's annual income in gold alone was 666 talents, over 25 tons of gold each year. Solomon's throne was unlike any other. Described in 1 Kings chapter 10 verses 18 to 20, it was made of ivory and overlaid with pure gold, with 6 steps, each flanked by 12 lions, one on each side of every step. It was a symbol of his unparalleled power, and there was nothing like it in any other kingdom. The lavishness extended beyond the palace. In 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 21, it is noted, all King Solomon's goblets were gold, and all the household articles in the palace of the forest of Lebanon were pure gold. Nothing was made of silver, because silver was considered of little value in Solomon's days. This illustrates the sheer abundance and opulence of his reign, where even silver was seen as commonplace and unworthy. Yet, with this immense wealth came temptation. Solomon's power and influence led him to form alliances with surrounding nations, often sealed through marriage. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 1 to 2 that Solomon loved many foreign women, including Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, nations the Lord had warned Israel against intermarrying with, for they would surely turn their hearts after other gods. Solomon took these warnings lightly. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 3. These marriages were more than mere political alliances. They were a direct violation of God's command in Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 17, which instructed that the king must not take many wives, or his heart will be led astray. As Solomon's reign progressed, the influence of his foreign wives began to take a heavy toll on his spiritual life. The Bible tells us in 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 4, as Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. Despite all the wisdom God had given him, Solomon allowed his love for these women to overshadow his devotion to the God of Israel. Solomon's disobedience manifested in the construction of high places, altars on elevated grounds where sacrifices and worship to foreign gods took place. He built altars for Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, a deity associated with fertility and sensuality, directly opposing the holiness of God. 1 Kings chapter 11 verse 5. He also constructed high places for Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Molech, the god of the Ammonites, whose worship included child sacrifice, a practice detestable to the Lord. 1 Kings chapter 11 verses 7 to 8. These actions were not just acts of cultural acceptance, they were direct violations of God's commandments. In Deuteronomy, chapter 12, verses 2 to 3, God had specifically instructed the Israelites to destroy all high places dedicated to other gods, not to build new ones. Solomon's actions, therefore, were a flagrant disobedience of God's clear commands. The tragic irony of Solomon's story is that the very wisdom he had asked for to discern between good and evil was now overshadowed by his moral compromises. He became entangled in idolatry, something God had warned Israel against since the days of Moses. In Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verses 3 to 4, God had commanded, "Do not intermarry with them. Do not give your daughters to their sons, or take their daughters for your sons, for they will turn your children away from following me to serve other gods." Despite these clear warnings, Solomon's heart was drawn away. His divided loyalty stands in stark contrast to his father David, who, despite his own failings, remained devoted to God. God's anger toward Solomon was not hidden. The Lord had appeared to Solomon twice, first at Gibeon and later in Jerusalem, reaffirming his covenant and warning him to walk faithfully. In 1 Kings chapter 9, verses 6 to 7, God had said, "But if you or your descendants turn away from me and do not observe the commands and decrees I have given you and go off to serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land I have given them." Despite these warnings, Solomon's heart was hardened. He continued to build shrines and engage in idolatrous worship. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 9 to 10 records God's response. "The Lord became angry with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Although he had forbidden Solomon to follow other gods, Solomon did not keep the Lord's command." Solomon's tragic turning away serves as a cautionary tale. The man who had everything, wisdom, wealth, and divine favor, allowed his heart to be seduced by the allure of foreign gods and the influence of those around him. He traded his devotion to God for the acceptance of his wives and the idols they worshipped. The God who had blessed Solomon so abundantly now pronounced a severe judgment upon him. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 11, the Lord declared, "Since this is your attitude, and you have not kept my covenant and my decrees, which I commanded you, I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates." This prophecy signaled the beginning of the end for the United Kingdom of Israel. The once glorious realm that Solomon had built with God's blessing was now set on a course toward division, conflict, and strife. God's judgment was swift and decisive, yet tempered with mercy. For the sake of David, Solomon's father, God would not tear the kingdom away during Solomon's lifetime. Instead, the full weight of the consequences would fall upon his son, Rehoboam. 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 12 to 13. God's judgment was a direct consequence of Solomon's unfaithfulness. Though Solomon had been chosen by God, his heart had strayed too far. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 29 to 31, we see a powerful illustration of this when the prophet Ahijah met Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, outside Jerusalem. Ahijah took hold of his new cloak, tore it into 12 pieces, and said to Jeroboam, "Take 10 pieces for yourself, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. See, I am going to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hand and give you 10 tribes." On the last day of his life, King Solomon, once the wisest and wealthiest man on earth, sat in his palace, reflecting on the splendor that had defined his reign. His life had been filled with incredible achievements, wisdom that astounded nations, wealth beyond measure, and a kingdom that reached the zenith of its power under his rule. But his final moments were not filled with the joy of those accomplishments. Instead, they were marked by a deep sense of loss, disobedience, and regret. Solomon's reflections are captured poignantly in the book of Ecclesiastes, a work often attributed to his later years. In Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2, Solomon laments, "Meaningless, meaningless," says the teacher, "utterly meaningless. Everything is meaningless. These words echo the emptiness that Solomon felt as he looked back on a life that had strayed from its original purpose. Despite his immense wisdom, he had lost sight of the God who had given him everything. As he sat in his palace, Solomon's mind wandered through the years. He remembered the day he dedicated the temple, a grand and sacred structure built to honor the Lord, 1 Kings chapter 8. He had prayed earnestly for God's presence to fill the temple, and God's glory had descended like a cloud, affirming his pleasure with Solomon's work. But now, Solomon's heart was far from those days of devotion. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2 verses 10 to 11, Solomon reflects on the vanity of his pursuits. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired, I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind, nothing was gained under the sun. Solomon's wealth had allowed him to indulge in every possible pleasure. He built grand palaces, planted vineyards, amassed treasures, and even imported exotic animals. He had hundreds of servants and musicians to entertain him. Yet, in his old age, all these accomplishments felt hollow. He had pursued everything the world had to offer, but had lost his spiritual direction along the way. The once wise king now understood that all his achievements were nothing without God. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verse 10 highlights the futility of his material pursuits. Whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless. Solomon had learned too late that his heart's desires had led him away from God's path. In his younger years, Solomon had a close relationship with God. He had built the temple as a symbol of God's presence among his people. But over time, his many foreign marriages, alliances, and compromises with idolatry had distanced him from the Lord. He had forsaken his first love, the God of his youth, who had appeared to him in dreams and granted him unparalleled wisdom. Solomon's writings reveal a man who had experienced the highs and lows of life. In Proverbs chapter 3 verses 5 to 6, he had once counseled, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight." Yet he had failed to follow his own wisdom. In his pursuit of earthly pleasures, he had leaned on his own understanding and strayed from God's straight path. In Ecclesiastes chapter 12 verse 13, Solomon gives a final piece of advice that sums up his reflections. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. These words, written at the end of his life, capture the essence of what Solomon had come to realize, that obedience to God is the only true path to fulfillment. Solomon's final day was a somber reminder of the fleeting nature of earthly pursuits. He had been granted the greatest of gifts, but had squandered them by turning away from God. As he faced his last moments, he understood that his wisdom, wealth, and power were worthless without a heart devoted to the Lord. In Ecclesiastes chapter 7 verse 29, Solomon expresses a poignant truth. "This only have I found, God created mankind upright, but they have gone in search of many schemes." Solomon, the wisest man of his time, had fallen prey to the schemes of his own making. His final reflections serve as a warning to all who seek fulfillment in the things of this world rather than in God. Solomon's story is a sobering lesson on the importance of staying true to God. His last day was not marked by celebration, but by deep reflection on what he had lost. He had started with so much promise, yet his final years were clouded by regret. The wisest king who ever lived had learned the hard way that no amount of wealth, wisdom, or pleasure could replace a heart fully devoted to God. May we take to heart Solomon's final words and remember that our true purpose lies not in the pursuit of earthly gain, but in fearing God and keeping his commandments. Solomon's legacy reminds us that life's greatest treasures are found not in what we build for ourselves, but in the relationship we maintain with our Creator. The last day of King Solomon's life was not marked by the joy of victory, but by the sorrow of a life that had strayed from God. Let us learn from his mistakes. It's not how you start, but how you finish that matters. May we all strive to remain faithful to God until the very end. Thank you for watching. If you found this video enlightening, please like, subscribe, and share. And remember, the true wisdom comes from following God with all your heart, mind, and soul.